Welcome back to the Crimson Chat, where KU's most visionary minds share the stories behind their breakthroughs. I'm your host, Jaden Hill, and today we're talking about sustainability, innovation, and the future of engineering with Dr. Mark Shiflett, Foundation Distinguished Professor and Director of NSF Engineering Research Center, known as EARTH. Dr. Shiflett's work is changing the way we think about energy, materials, and the environment. From refrigerant technology to critical metal recycling, his research is helping industries become cleaner, safer, and more efficient. Dr. Shiflett, welcome to the Crimson Chat.
Jaden, thanks for having me here today.
Absolutely. And before we dive into your very interesting work, I'm going to do a couple just get to know you questions. So first off, what originally sparked your interest in engineering?
Well, that's a great question. I think it goes back to my childhood. I enjoyed building things. So from a very young age, building things with Legos, to when I got older, building model airplanes, model rockets. And that interest in building things, I think, led me to wanting to go to engineering school. And so I went to NC State University, which is where I got my bachelor's degree in chemical engineering.
Awesome. And why did you choose chemical engineering over the many different areas?
Yeah, I'd say there was some influence by my family. My father was a chemical engineer, and he was also a professor and taught chemistry. And so I had some good high school teachers in mathematics, in chemistry, and physics. So I think that led me down the path of going to chemical engineering school.
And I'm curious, is there anything in your background besides just your dad being an engineer that really shapes what your work focuses on today?
Yeah, I think when I graduated with my degree in chemical engineering, I went straight to work for the DuPont company, where I worked for 29 years. And that, I think, really shaped my interests in what I'm doing today. The DuPont company was working on sustainability even 30 years ago. And in fact, the very first project that I worked on was developing a new refrigerant for the supermarket industry. At that time, the refrigerants, if they leaked out, were depleting the Earth's ozone layer. And it was a big crisis, and so we were working on developing new refrigerants that can be safe for the environment. And so I think that sort of shaped my interests in sustainability.
And moving more into your work, you lead a research center called EARTH. What does EARTH stand for, and what do you guys do?
Yeah, EARTH stands for Environmentally Applied Refrigerant Technology Hub. It's a new engineering research center funded by the National Science Foundation. It's actually composed of 6 universities. So KU is the lead university, and then we have the University of Notre Dame, University of Maryland, University of Hawaii, University of South Dakota, and Lehigh University. And we're all working together to try to develop more sustainable refrigerants, more sustainable cooling technologies, and creating what we call a circular refrigerant economy.
And so when you say refrigerants, the first thing that I think of is a refrigerator based off the name, obviously. What is exactly a refrigerant, and is it a refrigerator?
Yes. So basically anything that cools has what's called a refrigerant inside. And so your refrigerator, for example, there's a refrigerant that circulates between the inside of the refrigerator and the outside of the refrigerator. And it's moved using a compressor that usually sits at the bottom. And that refrigerant is transferring heat from inside the refrigerator to outside the refrigerator. So this is the same for your home, this is the same for your car, but that refrigerant is actually the fluid that's moving the heat in and out of the system.
And so your team really focuses on sustainability, especially in engineering and refrigerants. What does that look like, and how does you working on these refrigerants affect the larger environment?
Yeah, let me give you an example. So the refrigerant that's used in your air conditioner for your home, it's actually composed of 2 different gases. And one of those gases is safe to continue to use into the future, and the other gas has a high global warming potential, and so we want to replace that. But there's no technology for separating those two gases. So we're developing new technology in order to separate those gases so that we can recycle one and then repurpose the other. And sustainability is all about being able to recycle and reuse materials over and over again.
And to get a little bit closer to what exactly you do, your work is with ionic liquids and membranes, porous materials. Though a lot of our listeners aren't scientists, some are. How do you use those and what are they?
Yeah, well, let's start with ionic liquids. Ionic liquids are a salt. So when you think of salt, you probably think of sodium chloride. That has a very high melting point. It's actually 800 degrees C. An ionic liquid is a liquid at room temperature. So it's a liquid salt. And so ionic liquids, porous materials, and membranes, we're using all three of those in order to be able to separate things that otherwise cannot be separated.
And for a real-world application, how does your work, for example, affect a refrigerator? Like, what is the change that you're making exactly?
Yeah, so the work that we're doing is that refrigerant that I talked about that transfers the heat from inside to outside, that refrigerant has to be replaced. And so all the cooling systems, not only in the United States, but around the world, those refrigerants are going to be replaced over about the next 2 decades because people are concerned if they leak out of the system that now they're contributing to global warming. And so you think about how many refrigerators, cars, homes, AC systems, buildings that we're talking about. It's a huge number that has to be retrofitted or replaced over the next 2 decades. So we're working on new refrigerants that would replace those that are environmentally safe, as well as more energy efficient. So the amount of energy that we use for cooling in the United States is about 20 to 30% of all our electricity. And so we want to not only replace the refrigerants with something more environmentally friendly, but something that actually uses less electricity. And that'll be important to all Americans because everyone who pays a power bill would love to pay less electricity in the summer months.
I know I definitely would. That's one thing, I'm finally a homeowner. There's a lot of bills that go along with that. How do you balance cutting edge technology and these really important discoveries that you're making with real world application? A lot of people that we talk to are like, there's these really complicated things that they're doing. And I mean, how likely is this to become something that's, that we can replace our refrigerants with within the next 5, 10, 15 years? Like, how soon are we going to be able to see that?
Yeah. So I would say the projects we're working on have different time frames. So some projects are probably 2 to 3 years from commercialization. Other projects are probably 10 years. And I'll give you an example. I have some students that graduated with their PhDs in 23 and 24, and they developed a technology for separating these refrigerants. And now they've created a company out at KU Innovation Park, and they've now piloted the technology, proven that it works, and they're in the process of signing commercial contracts with customers in order to commercialize that technology. So we try to encourage students to think about the applications while they're doing the fundamental work. And in some cases, their entrepreneurial spirit leads them down the path of even starting a company.
Well, that's amazing, and it feels like it's really a practical thing that we can see in the future, which is just really exciting. And you also direct the wonderful Institute for Sustainable Engineering. What's the vision behind that institution? Yeah,
so the wonderful Institute for Sustainable Engineering at the University of Kansas, we like to refer to it as WISE KU. It's focused in 4 areas: water, energy, food, and climate. And we've got projects in sustainability in each of those. I'll tell you about one. So the wonderful company in California who makes products like Wonderful Pistachios, Palm Wonderful Juice, Halo Oranges, they sponsored and gave a gift to create the Wonderful Institute here at Kansas. And one of the projects that we're working on is pistachio shells. So everyone eats pistachios. Usually they throw the shells away, But we're looking at grinding those shells into a powder, and there's an important component in those shells called polyphenols that's good for gut health. And then we're doing animal studies. So we have animal studies going on with some customers that make food for cats and dogs, and it looks like it's going to be very beneficial as a fiber ingredient for animals.
So this kind of brings me to my next question. You help with a wide range of different research. I mean, just like you mentioned here, all the way from refrigerants to pistachio shells. How do you decide what to research?
Yeah, great question. Well, when I was at DuPont, I got to work on a lot of different kinds of projects. And I think that led to me not being afraid to try new things. And many times projects fail, especially in industry. So I brought that same kind of spirit here. And so as colleagues of mine brought ideas to work on together, in some cases I had no idea, vaccines, for example. We worked on ways to store vaccines at room temperature so you didn't have to refrigerate them. At the beginning, I knew nothing about vaccines. We're working on a project with the University of Minnesota that's doing organ preservation. Today, you remove an organ, it only can stay out of the body for maybe a few hours to a few days. We're working with them to try to develop techniques so that you can store organs for weeks, if not months, so that they're available when people need them. Again, I knew nothing about this, but the students and I learn, and I enjoy learning, and so if the project sounds exciting and fun, we take it on as a challenge and work on it.
I love to see how interdisciplinary you are and just how many ways you're helping in all these different factors. But a huge part of your work is collaboration, whether that be with students or faculty or even industry professionals. What does that collaboration look like? How do you lead with different types of, even understanding like a student compared to maybe a PhD student or different stuff like that? What is your leadership style and how do you collaborate?
Yeah, again, I think working at DuPont, I worked with a lot of different people in different disciplines at all different levels. And I think here at the university, you have the same opportunity. So we have freshman students working in our labs all the way through seniors, graduate students, postdocs, industry. And you have to kind of understand where they are and then provide them with opportunities so that they can develop and then ultimately lead and take advantage of their skills. And where they have gaps, you try to fill in. And so over time, that seems to build really strong teams where everybody's learning and moving towards the same objective. And so I've done that now over and over in the 9 years that I've been here, and it seems to be a very effective model.
Clearly you've done a lot of work, so I would say absolutely very effective. And how does KU's engineering ecosystem affect your innovations and your work?
Yeah, so I've really enjoyed being at the University of Kansas. They've provided many opportunities from the very beginning when they provided a laboratory for me to set up and do research. As we've grown, there's been more space available for us to add new faculty members that work with me. And even having KU Innovation Park and having that as an incubator for students that are interested in creating their own companies and having office spaces. All of that has just worked really well and led to, I think, us being successful.
And can you speak a little bit to what is KU's Innovation Park?
Yeah, so KU Innovation Park is over on West Campus, and it's an incubator for startup companies. And they have currently about 60, I think, startup companies out of KU Innovation Park. And it's really helpful when you have students who want to pursue starting a company. They have resources there for them, everything from marketing and legal. And so now I've got 4 students over there that are running a company. And I have another postdoc who's ready to start his own company. So I try to encourage that as much as I can because it's really a lot of fun to see them also be so successful.
It's really exciting to be a part of something like that and to see your students grow in that way. And speaking of your students, you're also a professor, so you teach classes. What classes do you teach, and what does your teaching world look like?
Yeah, so I teach the senior lab course. So it's a 2-semester sequence where students go into a laboratory, and what they've learned in their freshman through junior years and subjects like kinetics, thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, now they actually get to go do real experiments in those areas to strengthen the fundamentals that they've learned in the classroom. And so I've been fortunate to be able to build some new experiments each year that I've been here. And so I really like working with them in the lab. It's hands-on. And you get to help them in other areas. You get to help them with public speaking. You get to help them with writing. You get to help them with safety. You get to help them with understanding ethics. And I feel like all of those in combination with the fundamentals they learned is preparing them for that next chapter in their lives, which is usually going on into industry or perhaps going to graduate school or professional school.
I really like it that you bring up not just the academic side, but yeah, that ethical side and that safety side, because all my best professors that I've had, they've not just focused on the course material, but who are you as a person and how do we develop you in the best way for whatever professional field that you're going into. So I think that's really a mark of a great teacher. And I want to move over a little bit and talk about sustainability for a second, because that's a buzzword today. We hear a lot of people have sustainable initiatives. What does sustainability look like within engineering, and how would you define sustainability?
Yeah, so I kind of like to start with the fact that we are on a planet, and the planet is called Earth. And so what's underneath us, this is Earth. And it's finite. And it has a certain amount of resources, and we have to be able to take care of this Earth, utilize the resources effectively, and ideally we want to be able to reuse the resources over and over again. So you hear about circular economies, you hear about using critical materials over and over again, and engineering brings the processes that allows you to be able to use those critical materials over and over again. So imagine, plastics that you don't have to throw away, that you can recycle and reuse over and over again. You hear about this, we're doing the same thing with refrigerants. And so to me, that's sustainability, being able to reuse our resources over and over again.
And when you talk to your students about the work that they're doing and the work that you're doing, a lot of it's really looking into the future. How do you show students and teach them to look really long term and not just about today's problems, but what might be tomorrow's problems, the problems 10 years in the future? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so with students, I like to use examples. And so, like when I worked on refrigerants to replace those that were depleting the Earth's ozone layer, that refrigerant is used in every supermarket worldwide. And I'm still proud of that. When I go to a grocery store and buy something in the frozen food aisle, I look for the tag inside that display case that has the name of my refrigerant on it. And I tell students, all of you have the same ability to do this. And we're going to teach you the fundamentals, and you're going to then apply those fundamentals to problems that probably you don't even know about yet, but you're going to work on when you get into industry. And then you'll get to see, hopefully like I did, the success of that project and something that gets commercialized that makes a real difference in the world. And I think, in terms of what we have to work on, the population when I was born was about 3.5 billion. Now I'm approaching halfway through my life, hopefully, and the population is over 7 billion. So the world's population has doubled in almost half my lifetime. So where does all the clean water and clean air and energy and food come from in another 30 years? And that's what engineers can help work on, to make sure that we have processes in place so that there's plenty of those things for everyone.
So exciting, and the work that you've done is really amazing. I mean, just being able to have the impact to say that every time you go to a grocery store you can see your refrigerant is so exciting. Is there a specific issue or something that you feel more or needs to have more attention on it within the scope of sustainability and engineering? Is there something that you're like, I wish people knew more about this?
Yeah, I think sometimes you only focus on what's kind of right in front of you. And, for example, the climate. and the Earth warming up, it's hard to measure that. It's hard to see that right in front of your eyes. So I like to tell people, like, go out at night, look up at the stars. Last night was a full moon. You know, my wife and I are standing out in our front yard looking at the moon, right? We have to take care of where we live. And this is really essentially all we have, you know. Maybe one day we'll have a small population on Mars, but there's no atmosphere. You know, I like going out and riding my bike. I can't ride my bike on Mars, right? I can on Earth. So we've got to take care of our home and make this Earth sustainable. And so, you know, I think the more that we can focus on that, I think everybody has a role to play in that. It'll make the Earth even better.
And how do you take care of yourself? How do you stay energized? How do you stay inspired when it comes to your work in your field?
Yeah, you know, I think being at a university helps, because every year there's new freshmen coming in the door. And so there's that energy at the beginning of every, you know, semester. And so that energizes you because they have questions. And sometimes questions spark ideas. And, you know, I've had people ask me questions that made me stop and pause and think and say, gosh, there's an idea there that could maybe help answer that question. So I think being at a university helps keep you energized and helps keep you young.
And what's next for you in your research?
Well, we're getting ready for a big meeting. The Earth Center is just completed its first year. And so all 6 universities are coming here to the University of Kansas. We're actually going to use the new conference center over in the football stadium. And so we're going to have about 200 people. And so we're working on preparing for that meeting. So I'm excited about that. That happens in about 2 weeks. And then, you know, excited about what's the next project that we're going to work on.
What's something you really love about KU and being a part of this community?
Yeah, I think the university has provided resources that has allowed me to explore new areas. I never would have thought that, you know, I'd be working on refrigerants again. You know, I started my career working on this 30 years ago, and then here I am working on it again. As well as working in some of these new areas, you know, whether it's vaccines or organ storage. Like, I never would have guessed even 10 years ago that I would have the opportunity to work on these kinds of things. So, you know, I thank the university for that, you know, and being here and being able to have those opportunities.
And finally, what advice do you have to students who want to pursue engineering and research, or maybe follow in a path that you were in?
Yeah, so I like to tell people this quote, dream big dreams. And I'll say it again, dream big dreams. Don't be afraid. And you're going to run into barriers. You may fail. You pick yourself up again, but you dream big dreams. Because, like in my case, dreams can come true. And I like to inspire students to think that they have that ability to do that.
Well, that's really wonderful. And Dr. Shiflett, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your work and your vision with us. I mean, it's truly inspiring. And your research reminds us that engineering is not just about machines, it's about people, the planet, and possibility. To our listeners, stay curious, stay bold. Make sure you follow us on social media to keep up to date with what we're going on. And we'll see you next time on the Crimson Chat.